Welcome to the Pelican Debrief podcast to get your podcast debriefing. I am your host, Chris Barnewall, and with me is editor of Pelican Debrief, Matt Cianfrone. How are you doing today, Matt?
Doing pretty good. Can't complain.
Got lots of Pelican stuff going on lately in the news. The season is just 6 days away, starting next Tuesday when they open up against the Magic. We got tons of NBA stuff going on as well. For interested for a reform vote today, that happened today. How'd that go, Matt?
Yeah, surprisingly it didn't pass. I mean, everyone had expected it to at this point, just kind of expected it to go through without a problem. You know, a lot of teams thought Philly would be the only team to vote against it, but Zach Lowe's kind of reporting now that Sam Presti from Oklahoma City went on a little, I guess, you know, kind of what wording did he use? Lobbying campaign. That's what it was. And got a bunch of teams: San Antonio, Oklahoma City, obviously, Utah, the Pelicans, Miami, the Suns, the Bucks, the Wizards, the Hawks, the Hornets, the Pistons, and the Bulls to also vote against the reform. And they needed 23 votes for to pass, and they didn't get that. So surprisingly, the lottery's staying the same for now, so it's a big deal for now at least, and we'll see how things go through there.
I'm kind of glad that it went that way. I was one of the people that was against lottery reform because it just felt like change for change's sake. It didn't feel like it was changing anything that much. Like, tanking's a big thing right now with the Sixers basically finding every loophole they can to be the worst team possible. And I really don't see why we should change the lottery reform the lottery, because one team is making a complete and total joke out of themselves. They're hurting nothing but themselves. They're not hurting the NBA, despite what people say. They're never on TV. No one watches them or anything. Just all they're doing is hurting themselves. So why affect the entire league unless to change something that's really not going to cause an overall impact, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what they were trying to do, and I wouldn't mind some of the stuff that they proposed, like drawing 6 lottery spots instead of 3, and maybe even bringing up the odds for a couple of the guys at the back. But I just didn't think it was right to do it this close to the season for this coming draft, because right or wrong, teams have locked themselves into certain things. I mean, you mentioned Philly. They've locked themselves into being like god-awful this year. They're going to be horrendous. And you have some other teams that basically decided to go young, and if they lost, well, they were going to add a lottery pick and what should be a decent top of the lottery to their roster. So I just don't think you can change all that and change the way everything's going to go this close to the season. That's just going to mess with too many teams and what they have. At least give them a year to try to figure out how to, if it's worth continuing going down that road or what. But I think there's some things to come out of this, and I think eventually it will pass, but it'll be interesting.
I just don't see how this accomplishes the overall goal, which is to get rid of tanking, because in the end, you still get better odds if you lose more games.
Yeah, so, no, I agree there, and like you said, I mean, so we may not have got teams tanking for the 1 seed or anything, but you'll still have the team like the Warriors did a couple years ago where, they tanked down from, I think it was like 7 or 8 down to 6 and things like that, or the Pistons last year who tried to tank their way down so they didn't lose their pick. That's always going to be there. So I think I don't necessarily mind the idea of giving some of those teams that just missed the playoffs, a better chance, because if we want teams that are going to compete for a title quicker, there's no real quicker way to do it than, someone like the Suns from last year looking into someone like Jabari Parker or, whoever you liked out of this draft and getting a great player. So you'll have more kind of quick turnarounds. But, like you said, there's always going to be, in some way, shape, or form, there's always going to be tanking. Teams are going to see the end of the year and have a pick they're going to lose if it doesn't fall in a certain number of picks, or just decide that it's better for them to get as low as they can just in case. So there's no real way to win this at all.
And it really doesn't, in my opinion, go the way that everyone seems to think it does. Everyone's not the Sixers. Everyone doesn't try to be as awful as they can. Like the Hawks lost Josh Smith. They got rid of him. They were starting a rebuild of sorts. But rather than completely blow it up, they're kind of hanging around, seeing what they can sign, seeing what they can do with what they got. The Rockets' strategy when they were in that situation beforehand of they have a lot of nice pieces, so they're just looking for that one star player to pull it all together. So we have this idea that tanking is ruining everything that's going on right now, but is it really that big of a problem as it appears to be?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's hard to be great without a great player, and for some of these teams, I mean, New Orleans, it's everything changes very quick when you get a guy like Anthony Davis onto your roster. But like you said, there's different ways to build from there. I mean, the Pelicans could have continued to be bad for a few years and added lottery picks, and instead they tried to speed things up and they went out and they got themselves Drew Holiday and Tyreek Evans and guys like that. So there's a lot of different ways to go. Um, it was a weird situation, and it was something that, like you said, there's always going to be tanking, and so I don't think there's a way to fix it. And I think all this reform is, like you said, just people kind of blowing this Philly thing out of the water. At the end of the day, there's a lot of smart Philly fans and a lot of Philly fans I respect and know, and they don't mind. They understand what they got themselves into, and not every fan base is going to do that, and obviously, so not every team's going to be able to do it. But if your fan base has no problem with it, then why not? That was the way they saw. They're trying to find their Anthony Davis.
And we still don't know if if that overall plan is going to work because Charlotte tried something similar. They got really, really bad not long ago, and they're just now recovering from the results of that. Fans would not go to games. They had the emptiest arenas. They have the most back-to-backs on a yearly basis because they have to ask the NBA to give them more weekend games so they can get more people attending the games.
Yeah, that was the Anthony Davis lottery, actually. I mean, they had tanked down. They said, man, we've got this franchise player sitting right there, and they didn't win and ended up with MKG, who I like a lot, but he's
no Anthony Davis.
Yeah, he's pretty far from Anthony Davis, as are most players in the league.
Speaking of Anthony Davis, though, it's weird that the Pelicans were one of the teams to vote against the lottery reform when the lottery reform probably would have given them a better chance to get another really good player like Anthony Davis. Maybe not the same kind of once-in-a-generation talent, but a really good player to put next to him. Because this team, we saw last year how bad the season can go so quickly.
Yeah, it's, in a way, like you said, I'm a little torn in it, and I understand why it's not surprising that they wouldn't want reform, but it's interesting. I mean, this is a team that has traded away first round picks fairly consistently lately, and is kind of building other ways. And I guess the thought is, if you have Anthony Davis on your roster for the next few years, it's not a big deal because you won't be in the lottery spot. So it's kind of looking almost out and beyond Anthony Davis's career. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I wonder how much of it is just, the small markets stick together. You have on that list San Antonio, Oklahoma City, Utah, Miami. While they've been immensely popular lately, by the numbers, it's actually a small market.
They're a mid to low market. They are not a big market like a New York or a Los Angeles at all.
Exactly. I mean, Milwaukee, Charlotte, it's interesting that really the only name on the list that jumped out at me when I saw it was Chicago, and then I think about their owner and how, notoriously cheap he is, and it made sense. So it's interesting a bit, but I think this is kind of them thinking down the line when they're not necessarily trying to build around Anthony Davis anymore, because I think the points of them being in the lottery are over pretty soon for hopefully an extended stretch.
I was wondering if maybe because they have a recently new owner, a rebrand, and everything going on, I figured they were going to go with the majority to avoid rocking the boat. So, get NBA teams on their side. So seeing them go against the grain like that was really surprising.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's, I didn't necessarily think of it that way, but it's absolutely something that does kind of make sense and make make it even a little bit interesting.
Also going on with the Pelicans right now, we have the GM survey coming out today, and Matt, the Pelicans are all over it, specifically Anthony Davis.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, we're going to get to this point now in his career, and it's going to be a ton of fun to follow that he's going to be all over a lot of lists, in the future. He's absolutely incredible. But, I've been saying, and I'm sure most Pelicans fans have been saying that, for about the last year or two, that the only two players in the league that you take over him to start a franchise would be LeBron James and Kevin Durant. And to see the way the vote went, with Davis finishing tied with Durant at 25% of the vote for that question, who you'd start a franchise with, it's amazing. For a guy, he's 21 years old and he's entering his third year in the league, and he's right up there with LeBron and Durant. It's incredible.
Really, the entire vote itself is just mind-boggling. Like, you look at last year, 89.7% is all LeBron. Now, maybe it's just because, the age is starting to get up there with LeBron, so you want to start going a little younger and starting a franchise. But just Davis and Durant tying that put together tied LeBron at 50%. So, that's just really nuts to me.
Yeah, it absolutely. And like you said, with LeBron, a lot of it's the age is getting up there. He's missing games. He's looking mortal. But, and this is nothing against Anthony Davis, but, Kevin Durant's won an MVP award already, and it's not like he's ancient.
He was amazing last year. Anthony Davis didn't even come close to the level of amazing as Kevin Durant. Maybe he could be, but just that's a really weird list to have him on already.
Yeah, it is. It surprised me. The fact that he tied really surprised me. And granted, part of it could be, and I don't know exactly when this vote was taken, but part of it could be this is after the Durant injury, in which things change a little bit because of the worry that, this is gonna be a reoccurring thing with him or something. Or, maybe GMs just expect him to jump to such a level right now that it's or in the future that we don't necessarily think is going to come as quickly as they do, because this is essentially putting him up with two guys who are already on pace to be two of the 10 best players of all time. And I love Davis, and he certainly has the potential to be there, but we haven't seen anything that tells us it's going to be a likelihood like we have with Durant and LeBron.
Obviously, people are really, really high on him because when we go further down the survey, so they're the player that most likely have a breakout year. He's not up there again with number one, 29.6% of the vote, ahead of Bradley Beal, Andre Drummond, Klay Thompson, and Kenneth Faried. A few other players received votes, including Blake Griffin and Austin Rivers, of all people.
Yeah, it's interesting to see him on this list, especially because he was the top guy last year at 27.6, but more so because you look at the rest of the names on this list, and outside of Blake Griffin, it's such a different level than Davis. There's Bradley Beal, Drummond, Thompson, Faried are all good players, but the only two great players...
None of them are like franchise guys.
Yeah, exactly. The only clear franchise guys are Blake and Davis, and I guess you can throw Kenneth Faried kind of in with those guys.
He's kind of the face of Denver, but I wouldn't really call him a franchise player.
Yeah, Faried, my views on Faried are interesting in that he's good and he helps the team, but I don't think it's going to last that long, and I think his impact gets overrated by a lot of people. He's a weird guy to discuss and he's a weird guy to value, but yeah, it's strange. And the other part of it is Davis was really, really good last year, especially late, so he's kind of broken out already, isn't he? The guy's a star. He's a top 10 or 12 player in the league. Isn't that broken out?
I feel like this year, though, everyone's expecting him to do the next breakout, the Blake Griffin breakout last year, because last year Blake Griffin went from star to superstar level. Like, he was a true superstar next to Chris Paul last year because of how good he was. I think that's the breakout people are expecting from Anthony Davis this year, which really is a big expectation of him this year. Like, it's gone from a possibility to an expectation. He is expected to break out, and if he doesn't, it's going to be a disappointing year almost. He could be awesome, but if he doesn't look like one of those top 10 players in the NBA, like one of the dominant ones, then it'll be a disappointing year, which is a really weird expectation to have for a guy so young.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it's weird too because especially the last 3 games in the preseason, you can see just how good he is and how dominating he is. But it's also, you're almost left to wonder a little bit, like, can he get better this year? Like, at a certain point, you can only carry over certain things from the offseason into the season, and clearly Davis is more comfortable shooting the ball, and they showed the Omer Ashik, Anthony Davis 4-5 pick and roll this year, so he seems a little bit more comfortable with his handle. But it's not like you're going to add that and a huge defensive, even bigger defensive impact, and he's going to be a dominant post player this year, and he's going to knock down threes. There's only a finite amount you can get better in an off season, especially when you have all this USA basketball stuff out there. So it's a lot of pressure, and I almost wonder if it's unrealistic because there's only a certain level you can get better in the offseason, and I think he reached it, and I think it's going to be incredible, but is it going to be enough to make everyone happy?
Yeah, like he's going to keep getting better every single year. There's no denying that. But the expectation he's going to become an elite. Like last year, his biggest weaknesses was probably ball handling, which we see he's massively improved in, a consistent jump shot, which we're starting to see a little bit there, and his individual one-on-one defense, which so far through preseason is still a little iffy. Like, there's an expectation that he's just going to be great at everything this year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be fun to watch the public perception of him. At the end of the day, this is a guy in New Orleans that is unlike everyone we've really seen here because, well, he's, that big guy. It's nothing we've seen since Chris Paul. And as much as I love Chris Paul, it's pretty easy to argue Davis is already more exciting kind of than he ever was because of the,
I disagree very much there, but
it's in an interesting way in that Davis can in a second put any single player on a poster or swat any shot and come out of nowhere and just do these physically athletic, amazing things that we may not have ever seen before. And I wonder if he's not throwing up a couple of those highlights a game, if people are going to see it as a disappointment, kind of in the way, Blake Griffin is. If he's not putting someone on a, highlight reel or on a poster every couple games, people didn't think for a while that he had gotten as good as he was. And it almost feels like Davis can get thrown in there because of how easy it looks for him to put up highlights.
It's this weird thing where we got to build someone up and then tear them down immediately. Like, they got to become the greatest thing ever just so you can tear them back down and bring them back to the level where they actually are. It's really weird.
Yep.
Moving on to continuing with the GM survey, Austin Rivers is also on that breakout list. Do you think there's a chance with him left?
No. I mean, he'll be okay. He's, he'll help the team at some point off the bench, but I don't think it's crazy.
Will he?
Yeah, I think so. I think at some point he'll do. He'll have a couple games, but I also don't think it's crazy to say Jimmer Fredette's outplayed him this preseason, and in that case, I don't know if I can necessarily call you a breakout if you're getting outplayed by a guy that the team just kind of seemed to sign as insurance off the bench in case things went horribly wrong again.
Yeah, I used to be really big on him. I used to think that he got an unfair rap because he got drafted really high. He was Doc Rivers' son, and he got the reputation of only getting in that draft position because of his son. And then he had that really atrocious start to his rookie year, so he just got kind of written off immediately as horrible player, never going to be anything. So I used to really cheer for him, but just I don't see much. Like, I see an NBA player, but I don't see a very good one. Like, I see one that could very easily be, like, at best the 12th man on a bench sometimes. And then sometimes I see a guy that, like, I see flashes of a rotation player, but he struggles at finishing at the rim. His jump shot is inconsistent. His defense leaves a lot to be desired. And his ball handling an okay creator, but nothing incredible.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it's almost like he doesn't necessarily, you know, believe in himself at points because he said this, he wants to just play one position. He wants to be, I believe he said it was a shooting guard. And it's like, well, if your best role is that combo guard who's kind of sharing handling duties with Jimmer off the bench and things like that, well, that's where you have to fit. Like you said, his shooting when he's spotting up and his feet are set, it's not bad. I mean, he was a really good spot up shooter actually last year. But yeah, anything off the dribble shooting is rough. On ball defense is he's okay. He's not Drew Holiday, but he's not Jimmer at points, and
He's not Brian Roberts.
yeah, he gets lost off the ball. There are problems with it for sure. I think there's a chance he does pretty well as a seventh man for this team this year. I think there's a chance Jimmer passes him in the rotation. Like you said, there's just nothing in me that thinks he's got a chance to become a viable NBA starter, especially in New Orleans. I mean, he's never gonna get to the point where Drew Holiday is right now, and Drew's locked in long term. So I don't think we ever see Roberts break out in New Orleans because there's just simply not enough minutes for him to do it.
I just think to some of the preseason games where Monty Williams played him with Jimmer to try and have those two ball creator on the perimeter together, and just it was a disaster. Both guys dribbled way too much, hucking up shots, driving wildly at the rim.
I liked it, and I missed a couple of, a little bit of the early preseason game, but the last couple, I've actually really liked the Jimmer Rivers pairing. And I think as they become a little bit more comfortable with it, it's worked better. But I think it's also the point where it's like, well, you have two, average guards that you're hoping together can play, above average at one spot in a way. It's an interesting thing, and there's a limited ceiling for them, and there's probably matchups it's really not going to work. But we'll see we'll kind of see what happens, and at the end of the day, it's not necessarily worse than John Solomon's playing the two.
Oh man, moving on to the GM survey, this is probably gonna boil you. The best power forward in the NBA, according to GMs, it is a tie between LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin. Anthony Davis comes in at number 3 behind them, with LeBron coming in at 4 with 10%, and Kevin Love at 7% with 5.
Yeah, that's weird because LaMarcus Aldridge isn't, better than Blake Griffin or Anthony Davis.
I don't think he's better than anyone on that list.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made that the guys receiving votes, Tim Duncan and Kevin Durant, are better power forwards than LaMarcus Aldridge. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that one. If we're categorizing LeBron James as a power forward, he's the best power forward in the NBA. He's the best player.
Best player in the NBA.
Outside of that, I probably at this point take Blake over Love, but it's close. And then I think Anthony Davis slots right in there, with the potential to be in that conversation at the end of the year. But I don't think you can look at things right now and necessarily say Anthony Davis is better than Kevin Love or Blake Griffin. But I think by the end of the year, he'll be in that grouping and probably above them both.
Yeah, I could see him being part of that upper echelon of power forwards towards the end of the season as well. But he's going to have to improve his on-ball defense if he's going to become one of those guys, or become just an elite shooter like Kevin Love. You need to be either a competent defender like Blake Griffin who can obliterate anyone inside, or you have to just be a dead-eye shooter like Kevin Love. You can't be just kind of good at this thing and then kind of good at this thing and be one of the best power forwards in the NBA. And that's where the breakout season thing comes in again with Anthony Davis. Is a lot of people believe Anthony is going to become just this dominant player, and he has to become a dominant player in some way if he wants to be in that top power forward class.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if he shoots better from the mid-range now than Blake, I think he's more consistent there, and I mean, last year, Anthony Davis's numbers in the mid-range, I think, get a little underrated by people, and he was good, and especially late in the season, he dominated people. But like you said, there's points like things could get away from Davis. And I think by the end of the year, I mean, that was almost all gone. If he can consistently be that unguardable force, it's there. But I think Blake's offensive game is a little bit better at this point. I think Blake is maybe the best passing big man in the game if we're not counting LeBron as a big man.
I'd
and
say
like
Kevin
said,
Love is better.
yeah, I mean,
I'd say Kevin
it's
Love's a
close.
little better at passing, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I mean, Love is such an elite shooter all the way out to the 3-point line that it helps an offense more than what Davis does right now. And like you said, I think Davis will get there. I think he's going to be dominant this year. I think with Drew Holiday and Tyreek Evans healthy, Davis turns into the best pick and roll player in the league this season. With his ability to shoot the jumper, with his ability to attack the rim, it's hard for me to find any way teams can stop him. And I think that's his way of kind of, okay, I'm here. And like you said before with the defense, I think having Omer Asik there this year kind of tightens things up. And not even necessarily because of what Asik does on the floor, but I think Davis can learn things from Asik that he can.
He doesn't have to do everything also.
Yeah, that's big.
Like a lot of players, they want to do everything and just they can't. Even Dwight Howard, who's the best rim protector in the NBA, he can't do everything. Anthony Davis needs that help, and with that help, theoretically, he shouldn't have to worry so much about the rim behind him. Compare it like some guy cutting behind him and then scoring off the pass. Davis can just focus on the guy in front of him.
Yeah, I think. Excuse me. I think this is the year we see Davis become almost like a Joakim Noah type figure where, he can hedge on pick and rolls, and if he gets caught on a guard, it's not going to be death for your defense. He's going to be able to stick with it and contest things. He's already the best jump shot blocking player in the game, and I think this is the year we see him start to tighten up all those rotations and fix things and be that force outside of just the weak side shot blocking, which at points is what he was last year. I think everything tightens up and we get the guy who's, a defensive player of the year candidate, even if he's not necessarily the best defender on his team, because no matter what he does, Asik is never going to get as much credit as he probably deserves this year.
The GM survey has Anthony Davis as the best center in the NBA with 3.6% of the vote compared to, well, not the best, but on the list with Tim Duncan, Joakim Noah, Mark Gasol, and Dwight Howard. Do you think Davis is a center?
No, and neither does Anthony. So, I think this is a pretty moot one. I think, he'll see some minutes this year, but I think it'll be mostly against bench units. I don't think we'll see him necessarily playing, against any of those guys. But at a certain point, you have to play Davis and Ryan Anderson together. But I think that's the only way, you could call him a center. I don't think he is one at all at this point.
Yeah, the body frame doesn't really seem to fit. He doesn't really play that style of play. He's better at the perimeter where you would put a 4 than he is near the rim at this moment, in my opinion. He's not really a center type of player. And plus, I'd really worry that if he went up against centers on a nightly basis, he'd get injured a lot.
Yeah, agreed.
Speaking of Anthony Davis's defense, though, for the best defensive player in the NBA, he did receive a vote, which I thought was a little interesting considering we just went over how his defense needs to get better.
Yeah, definitely. I think block shots are going to, catch people's eye, and that's the big case with Davis right now. And that's not to say he's a bad defensive player. I still think he's at, good at times, and dominating at times, but a lot of it's just coming from the weak side. And this will be the year I think that changes, but as of right now, like I said before, it can be argued he's not even the best defender on the roster now that Omer Asik is in town.
Yeah, like he's also got a vote on best interior defender in the NBA, and we both agree that that's Asik in a landslide.
Yeah,
he did get a vote for. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, we had kind of mentioned, before we got on here, yeah, Asik is the most sound right now. He's an elite rim protector. My guess is some GM, whoever voted that way, took it as a hey, this guy blocks a lot of shots. He's an elite rim protector. And Davis does block a lot of shots, but he blocks a fair share of jump shots, and he's not always necessarily at the rim when he needs to be.
It's because of those block shots that he probably did get this vote. For the player that's the most athletic, you have the names you would expect to see: the LeBrons, the Blake Griffins, the Westbrooks. He did receive a vote. He received some votes, so that's a little surprising. But it's not surprising, but he's more long than athletic. That's what I think.
I think, and this is something I've seen him in person a few times, and to me it didn't jump out at me necessarily until I saw it, but he's really athletic for a guy his size. Just the way he moves around and he floats around, I think it is. But like you said, I think the length also adds to the kind of look of athleticism, because a guy shouldn't be able to move as easily as he does. And so it kind of doesn't make it look like he's necessarily super athletic. But there's going to be a couple plays where it's like, okay, yeah, never mind. He's really crazy athletic.
Oh, he's definitely athletic. It's just that's a list of guys that you wouldn't really expect him to be compared to because of his length. Like, I know he can jump at the way he skies to block jump shots is just incredible.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. But yeah, I see what you're saying, and I tend to agree. I mean, he's not a Blake level athlete. He's not LeBron or Durant. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
Moving to the last two parts of the GM survey, Omer Sheik got second with 14.3% of the vote as the most underrated player acquisition. This one was a little all over the place because you can see Tyson Chandler is 17.9% winning it. So obviously there was a lot of different votes. And then the team that will be the most improved 2014, Cleveland was the obvious winner, and New Orleans got second. So what are your thoughts on Ashik being an underrated acquisition and on New Orleans' possibility of improving because of the acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, Ashik's going to be so good for them this year, and he's going to be huge because he's huge. He's just such a big guy, and he'll protect the rim, and he'll always be in the right spot. And it's something that, a lot of casual fans and a lot of people who haven't, watched the Pelicans in the preseason or who haven't watched Ashik throughout his career may not realize at first, because he's going to shore up this defense so well. And the other thing is they're absolutely going to be incredibly improved this year because they're healthy. I mean, this is a team that got 15 games, out of their best 5 players last year, and that'll change. And they added a better defender in the middle, and people are healthy, and Anthony Davis is getting better. There's no reason outside of injuries that this team shouldn't be significantly better than last year. But you can't put them above Cleveland. Cleveland went from a non-playoff team to a contender, which is what happens when you add, the best player in the game and one of the best 10 players in the game in the same offseason.
I agree that the Sheik acquisition was probably a little more underrated than you'd expect, because I think people kind of forgot how good he is on the defensive side of the ball. Like, he's almost he's not atrocious, but he's not good on the offensive side of the ball. But his defense more than makes up for it. He's just amazing on the defensive side of the ball. And I think because of his time in Houston, a lot of that got forgotten about. So I think people will get a little bit of a reminder with that with the Pelicans. He's going to help them a lot this year. And the fact that they're healthy, I could really see how this team's going to improve. Now, if they're a playoff team or not, that's still a little bit of a question, but there's definitely going to be better. They're definitely going to be better than they were last year, which was just a disaster in every way possible because of injuries.
Agreed.
All right, moving away from the GM survey, the Ashik signing. Well, talking's hard there for a second. The Ashik signing was one of the many offseason moves they made this season. The Pelicans. What other moves did they make that kind of piqued their interest this year?
There really wasn't a ton. The Ashik trade was the big one. You gain everything with him we've talked about. I liked the lottery ticket they took on Jimmer just because, as we've talked about before, you can never have too many shooters, and he's one of the better ones we have in the league. I hated the John Solomon signing. He's terrible. I've watched him plenty. He's not good. I'm sick and tired of seeing the contested, fadeaway jump shot from the elbow. But those were really anything. I don't think Patrick Young ever plays an actual game for the Pelicans unless some weird injuries happen. Just because, well, I think he's a third or fourth big on some NBA team. He's not on this one. He's probably not even the fifth big. And Russ Smith will have his chance, but it's going to be next year, I think, once Rivers is finally gone and out of New Orleans. And I don't think Jimmer stays around. Either he's going to play himself out of New Orleans in a good way, where he's going to get paid money they can't and really won't want to pay him because of how much they have invested in some of the other guards, or he's not going to play at all and he's going to try to go find somewhere he can get his own shot. So I think the Russ Smith one, long term, probably is the biggest move outside of Ashik, but outside of Ashik, I'm not sure there's anything significant for this year.
Yeah, I was a little happy. I was happy with the Jimmer signing mainly because, like we both say, you can never have too many shooters, and they desperately need shooters to help with their spacing. Also, I'm a big Jimmer guy. I've been a big Jimmer guy. I always felt that he was underutilized in Sacramento due to just the fact that they had a coaching change every other year, and that was just such a toxic environment. And his defense was never good enough to play with Chicago under Thibs, who was just all defense all the time. I think he has a real shot to actually do something in New Orleans. One move that I think we'd be talking about more if he wasn't injured was the Pierre Jackson trade. I thought how they had this guy that was just lighting up the D-League, and he looked like he'd be a great backup behind Drew Holiday, and right now he's injured, so it doesn't really matter, but then they traded him away.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I think with Monty Williams and the premium he puts on defense, I don't think Pierre was ever going to really get a fair shot in New Orleans. He was undersized, he was small, he was worried about scoring. I think he could have been an electric bench scorer, but I don't think he was ever going to get that shot in New Orleans, so I guess hooray on the Pelicans for getting something for him while they could, but I think, the best chance they had of getting anything was at the trade deadline last year when there seemed to be a few teams interested. And if you actually didn't have any plans for him to be around long term, it didn't really make sense for them to keep him. I don't think he ever had, a first-round draft pick value tied to him, and it seemed like the Pelicans may have thought that.
It was just really weird to me that they, like, Monty Williams is always preaching defense, yet his defenses are always atrocious, and they were in desperate need last year, especially, of any bench anything. Like, if they went to the bench, when they went to the bench last year, everything went bad for them. So just you figured they got this electric guy that they can bring off the bench. He can do some things. He can be exciting for them. And then just they decided, man, we don't really want him. It was just a really weird thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting to see how it played out. But I think Russ Smith can be, generally as effective as Pierre ends up being. So we'll kind of see what happens there.
He couldn't really crack the rotations, which, with the team actually healthy this year, how do you think the rotations are going to look? I mean, the obvious starters are Drew Holiday, Eric Gordon, Tyreek Evans. Looks like he's going to be the starter at small forward, Anthony Davis, and Omer Sheik. But what about those bench guys? We got Ryan Anderson there. We got Russ Smith. We got a few young guys here and there. We got Jimmer and Austin Rivers. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, I was hoping after a couple of the preseason games, the Thunder one and the Rockets one, that we'd see Jimmer and Rivers in the backcourt with Luke Babbitt out there at the 3 with Anderson and Alexis Ajinça. But it doesn't look like it. It looks like we're going to get John Solomons at the 2 with the bench unit and Rivers at point guard, which that's just a horrific idea. I mean, John Solomons had 3 fouls in 3 minutes the other night against Washington's, backups. There was no John Wall. There was no Brad Beal. There was no Paul Pierce. So it was ugly, but we'll see. I think Jimmer earned himself a rotation spot. I don't understand why he's not in the rotation, but it sure seems like right now he's not. At this point, you're not going to have a unit that's going to be elite off the bench defensively, so you may as well just go out there and try to light everything on fire from 3, and with Jimmer, Rivers, Anderson, and Babbitt, you could do that, and I don't know if you can if John Salmons is the guy at the 2.
Yeah, I really just like you said, their defense. They don't have any great defenders off the bench, and again, like with Pierre Jackson, Monty Williams is letting this idea in his head that he needs to go with defense affect his decision making. Just Jimmer's been a better guy off the bench for them. They got some young guys off the bench that he's not going to play because young guys are naturally terrible on defense. Like you got Patrick Young and Russ Smith, and I don't think they're going to see any time this year, like at all. Just because they're young and they can't play defense when they have the chance to bring some excitement off the bench compared to John Salmons and Austin Rivers.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think Russ. I thought Russ would have had a chance. I don't think he's played well enough in the preseason that he's earned the minutes. I think he's kind of a year away. I think his size is going to be a big problem for him this year as he adjusts to the game. But I just don't understand John Salmons at all, and I don't understand why you go with him over Jimmer. It's especially going to be an issue if the team has to go with Anderson at, I guess, small forward, as they've kind of used lately with the Rhino, Davis, Sasha grouping with either Holiday and Evans or Holiday and Gordon, because then that next time that bench unit comes out and Monty Rivers has shown he wants to play 5 bench players at a time normally, or 4 bench players at a time, you have to have someone who can score, and I don't think you can do that well enough without having Jimmer and Rivers paired together. I think that's going to be the way outside of Anderson the bench unit generates offense, and I fear for everything if it's going to just all be on the shoulders of Austin Rivers.
I really like that Ryan Anderson, Anthony Davis, Ashik lineup, mainly because it's not going to be good on defense, but it's going to be amazing on offense. And the way this roster is built right now, they are all offense all the time. Like the defense last year might have been bad, but if they can get up to a mediocre status this year, that's fine. That will probably be enough to save Monty Williams' job. But they really need to just be lights out on offense. They have to outscore everybody if they're going to win games. If they can't outscore everyone, they're not going to win very many games this year. Like even with a healthy roster, they need to, putting up 100 points a night.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think with Davis, Ashik, and Holiday all healthy, you basically have a top 10 defense in the 3 of those guys. I mean, this team last year was, only there. I mean, they were 25th in defensive efficiency, but it was better when everyone was healthy. And I think with Davis, with Ashik, and with Holiday, you have 3 of the top 5 or 8 defenders on their position. So you can kind of mix and match and at least have 2 of them on the floor at the same time. And with Ashik, you don't even necessarily need the other 2. I mean, he showed when he was in Chicago he can prop up entire units by himself. So I think I agree with you in that the offense should be the big thing with Monty because you're going to get enough stops with Ashik there and Davis there and Holiday there. It's then cobbling together offense off the bench so that you're not, getting stuck in 8-2 runs and 10-2 runs every time your bench gets on the floor because they just can't score.
Yeah, they have to be just the starting lineup is fine. They have one of the better starting lineups in the NBA. I really like their starting lineup. But if their bench can't outscore other benches, they're gonna there's no defenders on the bench. They're gonna get pounded if they don't rely on bench scoring.
Yep, yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting, especially if Monty continues to play 5 bench players at a time as he's done in the past. I think with this team, you can be so versatile in the rotation with guys like Evans and Holiday to have at least one of them on the floor at all times. And then I guess if Monty's going to do that and has that in his plans, it's why we didn't see the Jimmer Rivers backcourt last game against the Wizards because the plan will just end up being play one of those guys at point guard with the bench unit and then let Rivers run at the 2. And in that case, that's an interesting thing to me. If you want to bring in Anderson early off the bench, stick him at small forward, and bring Evans off and let him be kind of that bench creator, it could be interesting. If Monty gets clever with things, this team should be approaching 48, 50 wins if he's going to get clever because they're that talented. But if he's going to get stuck in this, I have to do things this way, and that means not breaking things up so you get starters with bench players, it's going to be a lot harder because, like you said, 1 through 6, this team's as talented as most in the league, but 7 through 12, there are some real issues.
One way he could get creative is by playing with Tyreke Evans and Jrue Holiday on the floor together. You said the other night you saw they were running Jrue off the ball and giving Tyreke Evans the ball in his hands, which I personally like that idea because I think Tyreke Evans is a very good creator with the ball in his hands, and Jrue Holiday, in my opinion, is a bit of an underrated guy off ball. Like, he didn't do it much in Philly, but he's pretty good at it when he does it. So how'd that work out? Did you see anything that they could run into the season, or did it look like they were just testing some stuff out and seeing if it sticks?
Yeah, I couldn't tell how much of it was real and how much was just trying to let Tyreke kind of play his way back in after missing a few games, but I loved it when I saw it. Like you said, Jrue's off the ball is a great move, and it's a big thing is just he shoots the ball better than Tyreke Evans. Jrue's a 38%, 40% three-point shooter, so you let him be the guy who catches things when the defense collapses and decides what to do from there because he can knock down the open threes. And basically, if you just kind of continuously run pick and rolls around the floor, you let Jrue, catch it off some things and work off a pick and roll, and if he doesn't have anything, you kick it to the weak side for Jrue to let him knock down a three or work off a screen from Asik. It's going to be huge. This team's so unique in that the way they have things and the ball handlers they have on the floor. I mean, like I said, heck, they ran Asik Davis pick and rolls. The more you have different guys doing different things, the better, because it makes it so much harder to prepare for.
I'm always one of the believers that in today's NBA you need 2 ball handlers on the floor, and with that Tyreke Evans, Jrue Holiday dynamic, they definitely have that. And that if you have Tyreke Evans' ability to play with the ball in his hands, that opens up a little more room to run that Ryan Anderson, Davis, Asik front court that we were talking about earlier, because you have those 2 guys in the backcourt both creating, and then you have guys like Davis and Asik setting screens for Ryan Anderson to get open, who's one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. If he's able to recover well from his injuries this year, we still don't know how that's going to pan out.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and kind of like you mentioned, you kind of say you have to have 2 ball handlers. That's true, and most teams have it as the point guard and the shooting guard. Well, if you have your small forward able to handle the ball well off screen and rolls and things like that, you're just kind of putting guys in situations that they're not in a lot. I mean, really, when you think about it, LeBron plays off the pick and roll, but how many threes really actually handle the ball in a pick and roll anymore? Paul Pierce isn't doing it. Trevor Ariza isn't doing it. It's not a lot at the small forward. You'll see Durant do it. You'll see LeBron do it. But that's about it. So you just put guys in situations they're not necessarily accustomed to being in, and that's huge. I mean, any little advantage you can get is big, and that's one the Pelicans can and should exploit.
All right, I think we've pretty much talked about that out as much as we can. How do you think the season's going to go? Like, the general expectations for do you think they're a playoff team? Do you think they're a fringe team? Do you think they're a lock to win the division? Which I'm not sure how you could think that because they're in the division with the Spurs. Poor them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This team is talented enough to be a playoff team, but then you look at the West and you go, man, who drops out? And then you look at their division and go, oh my God, this is going to be brutal. I mean, there's potentially 5 playoff teams in the division. You've got Dallas, who's essentially a lock to be a playoff team if they stay healthy. The Spurs, who if they don't even have to stay healthy. The Spurs, who are essentially a lock for one of the top 3 seeds. The Grizzlies, who won 50 games last year with a bunch of injuries.
And
the
you
Rockets,
never play them in the playoffs, ever.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's almost, you look at it and you almost go, can 5 teams from this division make the playoffs? Because that may be the only way the Pelicans make the playoffs. I think they'll be in there till the end. I'm super high on them. I think they make it. I have no idea who drops out. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe Portland because I don't trust their depth behind their starters, but I have no idea. But I think this team is good enough to make the playoffs. I think Davis makes the jump this year, and I think they do. I think somehow, some way, Anthony Davis leads them to the playoffs. I think he's going to be that good this year.
I personally don't think they make the playoffs, only because I think Anthony Davis has to have an MVP level season to help them make the playoffs in the West. If they were the East, they'd be a lock. But because they aren't in the East, just the team that has the biggest chances of falling off, they need Phoenix last year, who almost made it last year, to fall off, and then they need a team from last year to fall off, Memphis is good every year. They always look like they're going to make. Everyone always writes them off every year, and then, oh, look where they are. They're in the playoffs, and they're the team no one wants to play.
Yeah, it's brutal trying to figure out who misses because, like you said, Phoenix, and Denver's kind of in the same spot New Orleans is in, where they were really beat up last year, and they should be better. And I think we've talked about this again. I think New Orleans is way better 1 through 6, but Denver's better 1 through 12 because that 7 through 12 spot, Denver's pretty deep.
Yeah, I'm looking at the West right now, and I just can't see who they're gonna knock off.
Yeah, it's tough. That's the thing. The Suns won 49 games last year and missed the playoffs.
They missed the playoffs by a game or half a game or something like that.
I can see that being the Pelicans this year. I can see them being a team that wins 45, 48 games, and it's not enough because of how good the West is.
Yeah, so I think if they're gonna make it, they need Anthony Davis to have just a monster, historic MVP level season. If they do make the playoffs, what do you think they're going to get? 8 or 7 seed at best?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way they do anything higher than that right now. I think the other teams in the West are just too familiar with each other. There's too much continuity there, and I just don't see how they possibly get there. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I think if they do make it, there's no way they make it as anything more than kind of an 8 seed.
Which would really show a lot of progress. A lot of teams they start off as an 8 seed and then they jump from there. We saw it with Oklahoma City before they became what they are. We saw it in those late 2009, 2010 Magic teams. They were an 8 seed before they really jumped up and became a contender. Just sometimes teams got to make the playoffs and get that taste for them to really get rolling. All right, well, any final thoughts?
No, that's it. Thanks for thanks to all the readers who've been tuning in late or tuning into this and going to this site lately. It's we've seen the difference in the growth and we really appreciate it all. So hopefully we can keep giving you the best Pelicans coverage you have. And check out the Hardwood Paroxysm basketball preview today. I was part of that, and we're all really proud of it. 318 pages for $3.99 of some of the best NBA coverage you'll get out there.
That's definitely the preview to go to. That's the one I'm going to be spending reading these next few days to get ready for the NBA season. It's only 6 days away. Really excited.
Can't wait, and we'll have plenty of stuff rolling out throughout this season.
All right, thanks for listening to your podcast debriefing. We will see you next time.